Good Lord, ride all the way.
A 10,
9,
8,
7,
6,
5,
4,
3,
2.
1.
Hello and welcome to Slooh, presented alongside our partners at the Old Farmer's Almanac tonight. We have got a fabulous moon show lined up for you. What are we looking at for all you lunar fans out there? You know, I reckon we ought to get back the term lunatic. It means moonstruck, because I love that term. And I think it's far better than lunar fans out there. But anyway, tonight, if you are moonstruck, if you're one of the moonstruck among us, celebrating the arrival of the August full moon, known to some as the full Sturgeon Moon, you've come to the right place. Now, have a look at this. This is our all-sky camera at Slooh's flagship observatory in the Canary Islands, and it looks like a blue sky, a beautiful clear day there, isn't it? Hey, the sun's shining. Well, no, it's not. It's nighttime there. It's actually 1 a.m. in the Canary Islands, and that bright orb you can see there is actually the full moon. You can see we've got quite a lot of haze there tonight, so that's not helping our images, but we've got some great ones coming up. Anyway, in fact, looking at that image, the moon is so bright there, it casts shadows. I don't know if you've ever been out on a full moon, but it casts shadow. Now, Bob Berman, who's going to be joining me a little bit later, he's got a challenge for you viewers tonight. What other celestial bodies can cast a shadow? Tweet those to us to @Slooh, or use the chat roll in on the live channel page at slooh.com. Now let's have a look at the full moon without further ado. Let's have a look at our wide field telescope. Look at this full image of the moon. Now you'll just see a little bit of, it doesn't quite look round, does it, on the left hand side? Well, that's because it's not quite full. It's going to be full in about 8 or 9 hours time. So there's still this little bit of shadow, and we'll see that actually in our other view that we've got, the live views that we've got from the half-meter telescope. Now, hopefully, now if you look at that just on the right-hand side, forget the little chunk out of it, the little straight line, but you can just see a little bit of shadow around those craters on the left-hand side. So that's coming from our half-meter telescope. That's one of the telescopes that Slooh members use every night. Now, as we've been doing all year with our partners at the Old Farmer's Almanac, we've been covering each full moon this year. And as I said earlier, tonight is known by some as the Sturgeon Moon, the full Sturgeon Moon. You know, that big, ugly fish, which produces caviar, which is rather nice. By the way, thanks, well, just before we get to that, we did another moon show earlier this month. Many thanks for the emails that you've sent us saying how much you enjoyed our first Islamic new moon show we aired just a couple of weeks ago. We hope to have Sheikh Abdul Bari Yahya of the Al-Maghrib Institute back to tell us more of those fabulous stories that he was telling us about the new moon. What a wonderful, wonderful guest he was. Now, to talk about tonight's full Sturgeon Moon and some other fascinating lunar snippets, I'll be joined by our regular guests from the Old Farmer's Almanac, including Slooh astronomer and astronomy editor of that esteemed publication, Bob Berman, and he's going to tell us some of Bob's best strange lunar stuff, including whether the moon makes a noise. How about that one? And don't forget, Bob set you that challenge that he wants you to tell us what other celestial bodies other than the moon can cast a shadow. And I've seen this with my very eyes, actually, when I've been at the Canary Islands Observatory. The skies are so dark there, this other object actually cast a shadow. I could see it. And of course, I'll be joined by Janice Stillman. Janice is editor of the Old Farmer's Almanac, and she's going to tell us who and why this particular full moon was named the full Sturgeon Moon, after that rather ugly fish. Not as some have mentioned on Twitter this week after we posted we were doing this show, that it was named after Scotland's first minister, Nicola Sturgeon. No, it's not. It's the ugly fish instead. Now, if you've got any questions for me or my guest tonight, just send them to @Slooh on Twitter, or use the Slooh chat box if you're watching the show on our live channel at slooh.com. Now, let's kick off the show by getting a better understanding of our closest celestial neighbour, the moon. And for that, there is none better than Slooh astronomer and astronomy editor for the Old Farmer's Almanac, Bob Berman. Welcome to the show, Bob.
Thanks, Paul. Great to be here.
Now, you're wearing your two hats, as I've said tonight. Now, you've told us on previous shows that as astronomy editor for the Old Farmer's Almanac, you put together huge lists of moon and moon phase and planet visibility. But we've had a question from one of our Slooh members. How do you go about calculating that, Bob? Do you use software or do you use a slide rule in an old-fashioned way? How do you go about calculating the planet's visibility?
That's really funny, Paul. Slide rule. Back when I went to high school, actually a technical high school, a science high school, we did use slide rules. And back in the beginning, I don't even know how many years it is. I guess it's 25 or 30 years now that I've been the astronomy editor of the Old Farmer's Almanac. In the beginning, I did many things by hand, but these days, no, we use computers for it. And I simulate the sky every single morning just before sunrise, every single evening, and all through the night for every day of the year for the upcoming year, and select the things that are special thereby. And some of them are very tricky. For example, Mercury has really darts in and out of visibility. So selecting the exact period when it can be easily seen, well seen, that's almost more of an art than a science, because it moves so darn fast that if you get it wrong by a few days, people may look for it and then not see it, and we don't want anybody to be disappointed. We
Absolutely.
want
It's not the easiest.
See
it's not
what we tell them is out there.
Not the easiest planet to spot at the best of times. Now, you'll have to excuse me, it's pretty humid here at Slooh's HQ in Connecticut tonight, so a little bit hot in the studio. But back to our subject tonight, Bob, the full Sturgeon Moon. The full moon at this time of year, we're seeing it in the half-meter telescope. It's a beautiful, beautiful image, considering it's so hazy there tonight. But the full moon at this time of year, it's really low to the south, isn't it, Bob? But why is that?
Yes, because the full moon does everything opposite to the sun. And we've mentioned this before, and I think everyone knows, or maybe they're learning it for the first time, that as the sun sets, the moon rises. The full moon rises.
Full moon rises.
At the end of the night, when the full moon sets, the sun rises. The full moon is highest when the sun is lowest. That's 1 a.m. or midnight during the standard time months. So it's everything opposite the sun, but it goes even farther than that. During the time of the year when the sun is high through the sky, and it still is, even though we're in mid-August now, that's when the full moon has a low trajectory across the sky. So it's in one of the three most southerly constellations. It's in Capricornus, the sea goat, whatever that is. What is a sea goat?
What is that then, Bob? A sea goat? I haven't heard of a sea goat before. I haven't seen many in the petting zoos. It's one of the
few mythological constellations. You know, right next door to it, there's Aquarius, a water bearer. I guess that's almost a little bit abstract too, because with indoor plumbing, nobody's really had to bear water, carry water for a few thousand years. But at least Aquarius carrying a big jug is real, and the other animals are real. Taurus is a bull, Pisces is a fish, Scorpius looks really like a scorpion, but Capricornus, no, that's a sea goat. Anyway, that's where the moon is. The left-hand side of it, it really doesn't look like a sea goat, whatever that is. It looks like a map of New York State. It's a bit like a triangle. And tonight it's all the way on the eastern end of it, just above the star Delta and Capricorni on the left side. And it's going to stay there all night long. The time of fullness, as you mentioned, is 9 or 9.5 hours from now. And so it's going to get rounder and rounder as the night goes on.
Yep. We can see from that last view, actually, in the all-sky view, exactly what you were talking about there, Bob. The moon is really low, to the south. And today, when we were looking at this view, the sun was going almost directly overhead, so you get this this difference. But of course, it's different for people in the southern hemisphere, isn't it? It's the reverse of this. The moon, the full moon, is actually really quite high in the southern hemisphere at this time of year. And it's also, Slooh members, it's why I did the What's Up This Week page today to tell you all the best sites. And it's why planets like Saturn and Mars are so much better to see from the Chile Observatory at the moment rather than the Canary Islands, because from Chile in the southern hemisphere, Bob, they're virtually overhead, aren't they?
Yes, yes, I'm looking forward to actually seeing them this November when I'll be down in Chile. But exactly right, precisely the opposite. And the only time that oppositeness doesn't happen is on the equinoxes. I look forward to next month's equinox show because then you have evenness, and the opposite of evenness in the astronomical terms is more evenness. So there you have the sun in its average path through the sky, and there you have the moon, the full moon, through its average path through the night sky. They both rise due east, they both set due west. They're both it's very fascinating. That's coming up.
Now, Bob, you set viewers a challenge. We're going to get to it in a second, but I do just want to read out that Antonio on Twitter has guessed that the other shadow casting celestial bodies are the Galilean moons. Well, if anybody else got any guess, get to them quickly, because I've only got one other question for Bob, which is quite a fascinating one actually, until we give you some of those answers. But Bob, looking at the moon here, we kind of think of the moon and we think of space as being deadly silent, even though we often see in sci-fi movies huge explosions with lots of noise. But the moon, you told me this evening that the moon can actually make a noise of sorts. What's that about?
Well, it might if there were air to carry it. As we know, air is necessary to carry sound. In fact, that's what sound is the motion of air molecules. So yes, when the moon is struck by a large meteor or asteroid, or we send an unneeded spacecraft crashing into it, as we did with the ascent stage of the during the Apollo program, when we didn't need it, when that was used up, we sent it crashing back to the moon's surface and got an amazing surprise. The seismometers left behind by the Apollo astronauts showed us that the moon, when it's struck, starts shaking and vibrating, and it doesn't stop after a few seconds. It doesn't stop after a few minutes, the way earthquakes on our planet dampen out after just a few minutes. No, the moon continues to ring like a gong for 2.5 hours.
Wow.
And so that must be telling us that it's very different in its interior than our planet is. We've got a part of our crust, the outer crust, the outer core, under the crust and under the mantle is liquid, and this helps dampen out when we're struck motions on the Earth. But the moon doesn't have it. It's almost like a crystalline interior, so it can ring like a gong. It's very cool.
Well, but it's actually a technique, isn't it, that solar physicists use as well. They look for these reverberations within the sun, even though it's kind of gaseous, you know, and they can tell from the seismic measurements. I think they use Doppler kind of effects, don't they, to analyze the structure of the sun in the same way that they've done with the moon.
Absolutely. That field of helioseismology is relatively new. It's only been around for a couple of decades as a way to figure out what's going on inside the sun where we can never see it. That's how we know that there are two balls inside the sun. The sun has a ball inside of it and then another sun inside of that one. It's got the innermost one, the core, that produces all of its light and heat. That's a little tiny ball, only about 1/300th the size of the sun. And then there's a larger ball inside the sun, 70% of the way outward, that spins as if it were a solid rubber ball, spins evenly, whereas the part that we see, the sun's surface, the photosphere, has a wild differential, almost chaotic spin where the equator goes around much faster. It takes about 28 days, and the poles spin around 10 days longer. So just like that, the moon has secrets inside of it, and the Earth, turns out, does also. We've got a little ball the size of poor Pluto, poor demoted Pluto, about the size of Pluto, that spins faster than the rest of Earth. So we have an Earth inside our Earth. The moon probably does too, except it's made of different stuff. It's solid.
Now, Bob, to your challenge. Now, you mentioned before the show, I think it was two celestial bodies, but you were kind of leaving out the sun that cast shadows. So 3 celestial objects that can cast a shadow. We've got some more answers here. We've got somebody who's called a baby duck, says our sun and also Venus. And also our friend Scott Sutherland from the Weather Network says it's Earth. The belt of Venus is Earth's shadow on Earth's atmosphere. So Bob, put us out of our misery. Celestial objects that cast a shadow. And I've actually seen one of these as well. So put us out of our misery.
And the person who wrote Venus is absolutely right. That's why I always qualify and say in the night sky. What cast shadows in the night sky? I thought you were going to give everybody a very easy question. What's the other thing that casts a shadow? I wonder if anybody was going to really say, duh, the sun.
Yeah.
But you're right, and you've seen it, and I've seen it.
Yeah.
When Venus casts shadows, they're very different shadows from the full moon. Tonight, when you go out and you look at a full moon shadow, the shadow has the same qualities as a sun shadow. That is, because the moon is the same apparent size in the sky as the sun, exactly, the degree of fuzziness of your shadow, when you look behind you, of course, you have to get away from the lights of any city in order to see the moon's shadow. You'll see your shadow cast on the ground as having a fuzzy edge, especially the shadow of your head. That's the fuzziest part because it's the farthest distance from your head to the ground. But Venus shadows are sharp-edged, and they look very different from the shadows cast by the sun and the moon.
I didn't believe it, Bob. When I first saw it, I mean, you have to see this under a crystal clear, dark sky, and that's what we've got in the Canary Islands at the observatory. And I'd been out, so my eyes were dark adapted. I was really used to the darkness, and I looked down and I thought, hold on a second, and I started putting my finger closer to the ground, and there it was. Venus was casting my shadow, and it was a revelation to me. I had absolutely no idea that it was possible. And I think that's the loveliest way, isn't it, of finding something out. It's about discovering it for yourself. But Bob, there are other people who say that there's actually a fourth. So the sun, the moon, Venus. Now, some people say that it's possible to cast a shadow by the light of the Milky Way, our galaxy stretching across the sky. Do you think that's possible?
Yes, it's possible. It's definite, because from really dark skies, like in Chile, every year in our tours there, I have the group put their back to the Milky Way, and we can all see our shadow cast by the Milky Way. But the reason we didn't say a celestial object is the Milky Way, it's kind of marginal to call it an object because it's so many different things. And of course, the shadow cast by the Milky Way is a total blur, just as a fluorescent tube makes you cast a very blurry shadow. The sun and the moon make you cast medium blurry edged shadows, but Venus alone has a shadow that is as if it were cast by the tiniest pinpoint halogen bulb. It's very, very crisp, looks like nothing else. And as you know.
Yeah. Bob, we've given viewers a few things to try there. They can go for the moon shadow, the full Sturgeon Moon shadow tonight, but you'll have to wait for moonless skies to try it out with Venus. Bob, Venus is currently visible in the early evening, is it?
Yes, it's just returning, but it's still low. It's still hard to see. We're going to have to give it a few months before it gets high up enough. And if you look for it, you need to be away from the lights of town. You need a night with no moon, the opposite of tonight. You know, this is the only phase tonight, the full moon, where the moon is out all night long. So you don't have even a chance to get a moonless moment tonight. So in a few months, when the moon is absent, that's when to hunt for those Venus shadows. It's quite worth it.
Well, we'll remind viewers of that when the time comes. Maybe we'll do a special show on it, Bob, and maybe we can be the first people to actually broadcast a shadow cast by Venus, because I've certainly never seen it on film or TV.
Great idea! With very low light equipment. What a great idea!
Yeah, we've got that low light equipment. I think we could probably do that. So that's a great idea. Anyway, Bob, thank you so much for joining us tonight with your strange, wonderful moon-related stuff. It's always a pleasure to hear from you, and we'll see you again very shortly, I believe.
Okay, great. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Bob. That was Bob Berman, Slooh astronomer and astronomy editor of the Old Farmer's Almanac, our partners on tonight's show. Now then, Bob also writes a huge number of books, as well as he's a regular columnist in Astronomy magazine. One of his books is about the sun's heartbeat. Pick it up. It's a great, great read. He's a solar expert, mind you. If it's got to do with astronomy, Bob's an expert on it, basically, isn't it? Anyway, coming up, we are going to be welcoming Janice Stillman from the Old Farmer's Almanac back to Slooh to discuss why some cultures refer to this particular full moon in this live image as the Sturgeon Moon, the full Sturgeon Moon. But to the thousands of people, young and old, tuning into the show right now from around the globe, I really want to encourage you to join the expedition to explore the universe with us, just like you're doing tonight. And we do it every night, though, here at Slooh. Our members aren't passengers, but rather sign on as kind of working crew to take control of the robotic telescopes in the Canary Islands and Chile, which we're using tonight for these live views, to share the most interesting places in space with everyone else in the community. Now, Slooh is a kind of social exploration, if you like, and together we have already visited, we reckon, over 50,000 different places in the sky and captured nearly 5 million photos of those places. So working as a team makes it kind of easy to learn from each other and share our diverse perspectives on space, the universe and the cosmos, all fueled in equal part by science and imagination and the human spirit to search and wonder. Who knows? We may be alone in the universe, but you'll never be alone at Slooh. I also want to share a little secret with you. A year in the making, there is a new Slooh coming. That's right, smarter, more powerful than ever. No, we don't mean a new host. Smarter and more powerful. No, you're stuck with me, I'm afraid. We are so excited to show it to you when it's ready, which will not be in the too far a distance. You are welcome aboard Slooh's expedition into outer space. It's free to try, so do join our adventure into the great unknown, and you help us bring shows like this to the public. Now, don't go anywhere, because we'll be right back after this quick commercial break. Welcome back to the show. There's the moon in the all-sky camera. We had a little glimpse of something else there. Look at that image. It just looks like it's daylight there, and that's the sun beaming down. But all of the light coming from the moon is reflected sunlight anyway. The moon doesn't actually generate any of its own light. It doesn't shine. It kind of reflects. But anyway, without further ado, I would like to welcome the editor of the Old Farmer's Almanac, Janice Stillman, to our show tonight. Janice, thank you so much for joining us, and welcome back to Slooh for tonight's full moon.
Hi, Paul. Great to be with you. I heard you and Bob talking about the celestial bodies that cast a shadow, and I'd just like to point out that I'm sitting over here in the shadow of the new cover of the Old Farmer's Almanac. It's the 2017 edition.
And it's out. When did that hit or come off the presses?
It came off the press soon after July 4th, kind of mid-month, and then it gets bundled together, and the whole gets put in the corner, and it gets packaged and put into trucks. And if it hasn't reached the store near you yet, it will soon, because it's on its way. By end of the month, it should be everywhere. Where can people buy it, Janice? Is it bookstores or magazine shops? What? All of that, wherever books and magazines are sold, and also on our website. For all you folks out there who don't have easy access, come to almanac.com/store. Or if you're within reach, call us at 1-800-ALMANAC, and we'll send a copy right to your door.
Fabulous. I shall order my copy immediately after the show, I promise. Now,
Sure.
we've said for a long time since we've been starting these shows with you that the Old Farmer's Almanac adds a very different perspective to our shows. The history and the folklore you bring to these celestial events, we think really kind of adds depth to our coverage. And I've had quite a few Slooh members contact me, say how much they enjoy it. So thank you very much for that, Janice. And long may we continue in all of these. Now, as we've said on our previous full moon shows, many have been named by various peoples down the ages, and the Old Farmer's Almanac has thankfully recorded much of that. Is that one of your core aims, to safeguard that historical information from being lost?
It certainly is. The Old Farmer's Almanac is first and foremost a calendar of the heavens. So astronomy is something that we take very seriously and enjoy sharing through Bob Berman, in fact, your other guest tonight. A lot of the details about where to look in the sky and when to look to see different things, conjunctions and planets and various other appearances and celestial bodies. So the idea of perpetuating the traditional names of the moon every month in our almanac and in our calendars and other publications is just part of the pleasure of really sharing, again, the tradition and nature and the way that nature works with astronomy and all things in nature kind of coalesce.
Now, actually, you just mentioned planetary alignments and conjunctions and things. Before I ask you about this full Sturgeon Moon, there's a really interesting kind of planetary alignment that viewers can see for themselves. Go out around dusk, just when it's starting to get a little bit darker, and you'll be able to see Mercury, Venus, Jupiter, Mars, and Saturn, all with your naked eyes. You'll have to look fairly low down and carefully to spot the fairly faint Mercury, but looks absolutely fabulous at the moment. And as the month goes on, Jupiter and Venus are going to get incredibly close. Have you got that written up on the website, Janice?
Oh, yes, indeed. We present that in the Old Farmer's Almanac. Bob writes tips and advice on when to spot things like that. I'm sure it's in the 2016 edition. And we also have a fellow who writes, who contributes features to our extra publication. It's an ebook that we produce also. All can be visible on almanac.com. So yes, it's really part of the joy of nature and the world, and seeing how Earth fits into just everything out there in the whole solar system.
Yeah. So basically, if it's happening in the night sky, the Old Farmer's Almanac are recording it for us, and Slooh are broadcasting it for us. So let's get back then to this full Sturgeon Moon. I have been racking my brains. I've deliberately not spoilt the intro to the show for me, no spoilers for me. I've been trying to rack my brains to identify the connection that any people could have made to that pretty ugly looking fish, the sturgeon. Many of the other full moon names that you've told us about, the strawberry moon, the snow moon, the buck moon, they're kind of simple to understand, but how on earth did the August full moon become known as the Sturgeon Moon? Who named it?
Well, like a lot of the moon names, it was conceived by Native Americans. And these were the folks who lived up around the Great Lakes and even Lake Champlain. And they recognized that the fish were in abundance at this time of year. And so they were easy to fish, easy to catch, and so store for later in the season. And these are, in fact, living fossils, these fish. They haven't changed in about 136 million years. They're quite fascinating. They suck food off the floor of the ocean and the lakes and rivers. They don't actually bite. They don't have scales. They have plates. It's a fascinating species. And, that's why it's called the full Sturgeon Moon. The Indians and Native Americans and hunters and gatherers kind of realized they would be abundant at this time.
Right. And we tend to think of sturgeon in the modern world as being the producers of caviar. We don't really think about eating them. Of course, there are many different types of sturgeon. I think the Russian ones are fairly scarce now, but they are incredibly ugly fish. And there's another kind of prehistoric fish that's still alive as well, the coelacanth. And I can remember seeing one of those in a big jar in the Natural History Museum in London. But so this particular moon, does it have any other names as well? Did any of the other tribes call it something else? Because
Yes,
you've
indeed.
spoken before that.
It was also called the moon when geese shed their feathers,
Oh, I love that.
because it was the period in the midsummer when geese were molting and they couldn't
Right.
fly when they shed their feathers. Now, maybe
Ah.
they were also hunted down, but it was certainly a noticeable pattern, a recurring event every year, in nature. And this was something that the Native Americans noticed. And so they applied this to the moon to give it place in time for them. And also, it was the end of fruit moon, because
End of fruit moon, right?
end of fruit, because the berries and other fruits on trees and bushes were all finished. The harvest was done, and the season was over.
Because actually, next moon, I think, is, among other things, it is harvest moon, isn't it? Next month?
It could be September or October. I think I haven't actually looked ahead.
Yeah,
but
it can be in either. I've got a sneaking suspicion that this year the September full moon is harvest moon, as well as some of the other names. I did wonder, actually, Janice. You're talking about the geese losing their feathers and things like this, and going for sturgeon. Native Americans were kind of the first ecologists, weren't they? They very much were one with nature. I wonder whether going for fish at that time of year was because maybe mammals, deer, and other animals that were traditionally hunted were still raising their young. Do you think that maybe occurred?
I imagine that was part of it, yes. And, for a balanced diet, a change of pace, or simply because these other folks lived near the body of water, I mean, that was the most convenient thing for them, the most convenient food source.
Yeah. Now, Janice, we're looking at this live image again from the Canary Islands Observatory. This is our wide field telescope. It's the best one, really, because it always puts the entire moon in the view. And we've spoken before, actually, with Bob, that this is actually the worst time to view the moon. It's great for casting shadows, of course, but to actually see any detail on the moon, you can't really see it because there's no shadows cast on there. But anyway, I want to switch to
Paul. Can't you see the blue unicorns and the horned bears and the beavers walking on 2 feet? Maybe the man bats. Look closely and you'll see the man bats.
Okay. Now, Janice, before you go tonight, we're going to switch to a slightly different subject, because I know you've been trawling through the Old Farmer's Almanac archives and have found a fascinating story about aliens on the moon, and it involves an astronomer, actually, from my hometown of Bath in the southwest of England, Sir John Herschel, son of Sir William Herschel, who discovered Uranus. Now, we tend to think of moon hoaxes being relatively a modern phenomena, but you've uncovered one from 1835, is that right?
Yes, and that was it. Yes, it turned out to be the Great Moon Hoax, but it seems that the New York Sun newspaper in 1835 was not selling enough issues, not enough readers, circulation was down, and they wanted to lift it. So on August 25th, 1835, they started a series of articles about what I just described. They claimed that Sir John Herschel, who was out of town at the time, he was in South Africa, as it happens, but they claimed that he reported seeing blue unicorns, horned bears, beavers that walked on 2 feet, which is always why I'm suggesting
I
if we
love
look
that
closely. And as well as sheep and zebras and pelicans and cranes and amethyst obelisks and volcanic mountains and forests. Can't you see them? Well, these articles about these discoveries ran for 6 days in the newspaper, and the newspaper was flying off the shelf. People were buying it and talking about it and reading it. And then after a couple of days, they started to think, why is no other newspaper publishing this fantastic story? Well, it became clear that it was a hoax. It was the Great Moon Hoax. People loved it anyway. They didn't mind. And for some time, it was not known who wrote it. Finally, a fellow by the name of Richard Adams Locke confessed, and he claimed he was just being satirical. All this time, John Herschel, who they said had discovered all these things, was away in South Africa, as I mentioned. And when he came home and learned of it, well, that was the end of the story. He knew nothing up until that time.
Poor chap, his credibility gone in one foul swoop in 6 days. You know, the donkey's years of work that he'd done to build up his professional reputation as an astronomer were just decimated. So, Janice, please don't repeat any of that in the Old Farmer's Almanac, you know, a similar kind of hoax, apart from actually the beavers who stand on 2 feet. I have that picture in my mind and I can't help smiling when I think of beavers standing on 2 feet upright. I think that's a great picture.
It is terrific.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Janice. Thank you for that story. It made my day when I heard that. We look forward to seeing you. Actually, I have got this confirmed. It's next month's full corn or barley moon, which this year is the harvest moon, I think.
Oh,
so
cool.
hopefully we'll see you back. That's going to be a really special one because there's so much to talk about. Maybe we'll split that down into a few segments to talk about all of the different aspects of that.
Okay. See you then.
We'll see you then. Thanks, Janice. That was Janice Stillman, editor of the Old Farmer's Almanac. Great story. You know, we do tend to think, don't we, of hoaxes, especially moon hoaxes, as being kind of this modern phenomena. But no, it was in 1835, and poor old Sir John Herschel, decimated reputation, just like I've done on our Transit of Mercury show. Anyway, mind you, I don't think I had a reputation anyway to worry about. Now, that just about winds up our full Sturgeon Moon show tonight. I'm going to go and find some air conditioning. We've had some fascinating insights of the strange and wonderful lunar stuff from Slooh astronomer and astronomy editor at the Old Farmer's Almanac, Bob Berman, and Janice Stillman, of course, editor of the Old Farmer's Almanac, joined us to discuss some more folklore surrounding the name of this particular full moon, the Sturgeon Moon. Now, before we go, I want to remind you of an upcoming event we've got here at Slooh. If you are in the LA area and you want to get a little more moon action, some lunar action, so if you are a lunatic after tonight's show, you can head over to the Pasadena Civic Auditorium for the LA Moonwalk event, which is presented by our partners at Celestron. We've been using Celestron telescopes as our workhorses since Slooh first launched in 2003. The event is tomorrow and it starts at 7 p.m. Pacific time. That's 10 p.m. Eastern. So pop down there and have a look. They've got special guests from the Planetary Society, including Bill Nye and Robert Picardo. And the event is going to feature art and music along with telescope viewing and a silent auction. It's all the kind of stuff that we love here at Slooh, mixing art, culture, science and everything else up together. If you're in the LA area, you can get tickets to the event by visiting lamoonwalk.com. I guess if you're not in the area, you can still pick up tickets at lamoonwalk.com, but you'll have to get a bus or a coach or a plane to get them. Anyway, tomorrow we also have our rescheduled solar show from Monday, and Slooh members will know that we've had the new Slooh Solar Telescope online this week, giving live views during the day, and these great active regions, and we're going to take a close look at that tomorrow. That is Friday afternoon starting 5 p.m. Eastern. Eric Edelman's going to host that show. You've had enough of me, so we've got Eric on. Bob Berman's going to be coming back on to share some of his solar expertise when they take a close look at that extremely active area of our sun. And that's going to be with live views from our partner at the Prescott Observatory. That's Matt Francis, the director of the Prescott Observatory. Fabulous, fabulous solar views that Matt normally provides. Well, anyway, I hope you've enjoyed our full Sturgeon Moon tonight. Don't forget, we're also going to be having another Islamic new moon show. That was fascinating. If you missed that one, Slooh members, don't forget you can always watch archive shows, and you really want to take a look at that. It's going to be a fascinating series of shows with beautiful stories from way back then about how important the new moon is to not only the Islamic faith, but also other faiths as well. So join us for that one. That's going to be a lot of fun. And we're going to be doing those every month, I believe, from now on. So anyway, that's about it as we look at this last live image from the Canary Islands Observatory. It is a bit hazy over there, but I have seen that members have scheduled all sorts of fascinating objects tonight. We've got nebulae, we've got galaxies. Oh, we've got one of my favorite galaxies, the Triangulum Galaxy, coming up a bit later. Members have scheduled that, and the Andromeda Galaxy. We've already seen the Whirlpool Galaxy earlier on tonight. And of course, you can get more moon action, live moon action, by watching the live missions. Well, that's it from me. Good night from me. Thank you very much to our guests, Janice Stillman and Bob Berman. They'll see you again tomorrow. Bye for now.